Hello, everyone. This is Karuta Club, and this time we're interviewing Masroor from Ohio, USA. So, Masroor, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Masroor. I started playing Karuta a while ago during the beginning of the pandemic. I got into it, and you want me to start saying that now, or should I wait? I got into it.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Somewhat through Chihayafuru. So I knew about Karuta from before then. I'd seen references to it in video games and played video games that or had mini games that were inspired by Karuta, but I didn't know that it was an actual sport. And then I had watched Chihayafuru and found out that it was a sport, and I got into it from there. And I got into it when I was 25, which is kind of old, but it seems like kind of anyone can play Karuta at any age, which I thought was really cool. And so I was able to get into it.
Great. And how exactly did you get into it? I mean, how did you start learning, or just online, Googling? How exactly did it happen?
Yeah, so that was really interesting because when I started, it felt like there were not a ton of different resources, and there wasn't a clear way to kind of learn Karuta. But I found a Reddit, and I found this website called Karuta SRS, which is a spaced repetition series that basically it has the poems, and it teaches you some of the poems, and then it checks if you know them, and then after a while it reviews them and tests you on them again to see if you still remember them. So I found some stuff like that. It was kind of new, and then I found the online app. It's called Competitive Karuta Online. And so I kind of just invented my own regimen for learning the poems, where I would just study every day until I learned all of them.
Great. And later on, you started to join other clubs in USA?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Okay. So after that, you actually joined a Karuta club. Are there any clubs in USA?
Yeah, so technically I kind of did join a club, but not really. It's a little complicated. So when I first started playing Karuta, it was during the pandemic. And so because of that, even if there were any clubs near me, clubs couldn't practice. But actually where I'm from in the USA, there aren't any clubs. Most of the clubs are on the east side of the USA. So there's one in New York, there's one in Boston, and there's one in Washington, D.C. And there might be a couple more, I'm not really sure, but there's basically just a few clubs. And so I didn't really join any club until I think last summer of 2021, where I technically joined the Boston club, but that was kind of a formality. So I don't live in Boston, but to get Shodan, which is the first rank, you need to actually be a part of a club. And so they were gracious enough to let me join the club so that I could have a club to write down. But yeah, I basically just practice by myself because there's no actual club near me.
Okay. And learning by yourself, from your point of view, what's the easiest thing about learning Kyogi Karuta?
The easiest thing about learning Karuta, I guess it's Karuta is in a sense a card game, right? Sometimes we call it a card game, sometimes we call it a sport, and it's a mixture of the two. But I think most people, at least here, I feel like most people have played card games before, even if it's just with their family. And so the idea of you hear a poem and then you kind of just touch the card at a matching game almost, I feel like that's fairly intuitive. And so I think that's even though you have to memorize the poems, that part of it is very simple. It's just I just have to move my hand and take the card. and if I take the card, it's mine. And I think compared to like other like sports or other games where there's like a lot more like rules that can kind of make it confusing, that makes Karuta really accessible.
Okay. And what about the hardest part?
The hardest part?
Yes.
There's a few hard parts, so it's hard to choose one. But I guess just learning the 100 poems, so that you can like play without needing any like external help, and so that you have like a fair chance at every single card. And that is kind of the obvious answer, but you know, Karuta is a little bit weird because like the cards have a poem, but it's the second half of the poem, and so you can't look at the cards and like read what's on it and then be like, oh yeah, you know, I hear it being read. It's like, well, no, actually that's the second half of the poem, so you just have to have it memorized what the like corresponding first half is. And I think that's like not very intuitive maybe, and so that would probably be the hardest part of picking up Karuta, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And the most fun part about playing Kyogi Karuta?
The most fun part.
Yes.
So here's something that stuck out to me from Chihayafuru, and I just only thought of it just now. I think in that anime, if anyone's familiar with it, there's a part where Chihaya does track, and she says that like the gunshot or whatever at the beginning to signal everyone to start running, kind of reminded her of like the moment right before like a card is being read. So I actually did track 1 year in high school, and I guess I wouldn't say like I related to it, but that moment of like right before a card is taken and you're like just moving to whatever you hear and not thinking at all, and taking a card, it just feels really good, even though it's like it's such a small moment.
Yes.
It's like it's fun enough that like even though the rest of Karuta is like a very slow-paced game, because there's like a lot of waiting in between, there's a lot of just like listening to them reading the poems. I think even though Karuta is a slow-paced game, that like single moment is like fun and engaging enough that it keeps making me want to play.
Fantastic. I love that part as well. Okay, so the main things. What are your strategies while playing Karuta? And I mean by this, your thought process.
Yeah. So I'm kind of an overthinker in general. People that have maybe like played or talked to me kind of know this. So I tend to like strategize a lot. But in general, I would say I play a little bit defensive, which means like, let's say there's like, let me think, what's a good example? Let's say there's 4 Mi cards, like Mikano, Mikaki, Michi, Mise, and 2 of them are on my side and 2 of them are on your side. In my case, I'm like more likely to defend my cards first and then attack your cards. And what that does, it kind of helps me build my confidence and ensure that like my cards aren't moving around too much because you're not sending me too many cards, and that I guess like I'm taking the cards that I know I can take, and it helps with my memorization a little bit, because like if you're sending me a lot of cards, then my memorization has to like I have to keep memorizing like which cards did you send me, the new cards, and I guess since I'm newer, my memorization isn't as good. But mostly a lot of it's just like confidence. Like I know I could take those cards because they're on my side, and so I'd rather like take the cards I know I can take first and then attack like on other cards instead. And so that's kind of a general strategy. But besides that, one thing that I've done a commentary on is that people think it's hard to play against me because and this is kind of contradictory to what I just said. I'll sometimes move my cards around on my side, or I'll send cards that are like really annoying to the opponent, and it'll like mess up their memorization, and then they'll make a lot of Otetsuki. And so people have said I'm like hard to play against because of that. because I'm kind of like tricky and I'm like forcing otetsuki. That's something I do more as like kind of a comeback mechanic, for like if I'm not doing too well, then I can like try and maybe force a tetsuki and then maybe they make a double and I like come back. But that's just one strategy that I sometimes use.
Great. Now, is there any difference in your thought process when playing with the app?
Yeah, so the app is pretty interesting. I don't know how much you want me to talk about it, so feel free to like cut me off or anything at any point. But
okay.
Obviously the biggest difference with the app and the real game is the amount of cards. And so when I first started playing on the app, I kind of just did whatever, and I treated it like its own game to an extent, which means like I didn't have a lot of real Karuta experience at that point. And so like even like my teichi and my like positioning, I kind of just did whatever felt like easiest on the app. And that, I think the app made me really strong at like the late game of Karuta, if that makes sense. Because when you're playing in person, if you get far enough, then eventually maybe you only have like 8 cards on your side and 8 cards on the opponent's side. And that situation is actually pretty similar to the app. But like you still have to be good at playing with 50 cards, because otherwise you'll never get to that point, right? And so I think the difference in my thought process is that I'm kind of just playing the late game of the Karuta, and I'm actually maybe a little bit more defensive in the app, because like there's so little time to memorize, and like holding a phone, because I play on my phone, holding a phone and trying to like attack the opponent's side just feels really weird. Like I guess the finger motion. And then on top of it, like you don't have any defender's advantage, because you can't use covers, like you can't put your arm in the way of like the opponent trying to get your card. You just on the app, you just have to get it there faster. That's the only thing that matters. So I guess my thought process is like I really have to focus on my side so that I don't like overwhelm myself and make a tetsuki, and I like defend my cards first. And if obviously I still try and get the opponent's cards, but if they defend their cards, I'm not too worried, because in the end, when it comes down to like 2 or 3 cards, I feel like it mostly comes down to hearing. Like everyone's fast in the last cards, and it's just like, can you hear it before the opponent and like touch it before them? That's kind of my general thought process. Is that what you were looking for with the question?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Okay. So for people who don't know, there is an app. I think I mentioned it in an interview before, but there's an app. So if you don't have any club or you are just in your house, you can play with this app. It's both for Android and iOS. I'm even going to put the link in the description. So Masroor, we're almost finishing this interview. So please tell us your next steps. Let's say in this Karuta world, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so again, not to like repeat myself too much, but my experience with Karuta has been really weird because of when I started. I only get to play like very intermittently, because I don't have a club near me. For reference, for people that don't live in the USA, I live in Ohio, which is in what we call the Midwest, and the like closest clubs are like over a 6-hour drive. And even the club that I'm like technically a part of is I think like a 9-hour drive. So like realistically I can't go, because it would take my whole weekend just to like play 2 games. And so my next steps for me is like very difficult, because I feel like I've learned the game pretty well. I think I just need to like keep practicing so that when I have the opportunity to play, I'm ready and I can make the most of it, if that makes sense. And so if I can say something a little extra, I would like encourage other people that maybe don't have clubs or that have to practice on their own to kind of take a similar approach of like, keep practicing on your own, keep training, learn the poems. Like there's so much that you can like learn and practice and study even on your own, so that when you have a chance to play with other people, like you're ready and you don't regret that, like, oh, I wish I had like practiced more, or I wish I had like been more ready, because you might not get a lot of chances, but you know, especially if you're ready and like it's fun for everyone, then maybe you'll be able to form a club down the line. And that's always, like, you know, exciting. I love hearing about new clubs formed, even in, you know, different countries across the world. So that's what I try to do. I'm not always the best at it, but that's kind of my next step, is just to like be ready for the next tournament and the next chance to play Karuta, and do my best at that.
Perfect. I love that message. Okay, so last final question. Do you have a favorite poem?
Yeah. I have two favorite poems, but I infamously have one favorite poem. It's Tare, which is the 34th poem. Do you want me to say anything about it, or?
If you can tell us like a little story, or why is it your favorite? Yes, that will be so cool.
Okay.
Please share.
I should have thought about this. This is an obvious question, so I should have thought about the answer beforehand. So Tare is an interesting poem because it's about like this person that's really old, basically. And he's looking at like Takasago's pines, and basically he's like, I don't have anyone alive that's like my friend anymore. So basically, to me, there's like a lot of different ways you can interpret this, right? Because it's a poem. But the way that I interpreted it is just that like his friends aren't around anymore, and so he's lonely, and like the world around him is kind of, even though there's like something that's kind of familiar, which is this pine tree, he doesn't feel like he fits in quite as much anymore, if that makes sense. Yes. And so I think the relatable part is like being in kind of a new environment, or kind of like not having the same friends that you used to have around anymore. And I think like in the busy like modern life, that can be really relatable, because, you know, people are, you know, moving for jobs. They're, you know, maybe you had friends that like you talked to or you lived with during school, and then you hung out with them, but then they moved to a different city and got a new job, and you know, you don't talk to them anymore. And I think like life is just like that. It's a lot of like, you know, you cross paths and you meet people, and you know, eventually you part ways. And so I kind of just relate to that whole feeling. And I thought the way it expressed it was very interesting. And obviously, like, it's an old poem, but I think that feeling is kind of universal to different, you know, different countries and time periods. Just universal to people in general.
Awesome. And your second poem?
Okay, so it's a poem that everyone likes mostly, but my reason for liking it is a little bit different. So my second favorite poem is Chihayafuru, but that's because it's the number 17 poem.
Yeah.
The number 17 for me, so like I don't really love the poem itself, which is kind of weird to say. Like I don't have like special meaning behind the poem or anything. I just like the number behind the poem. That's because number 17 has a lot of like personal significance to me since I was a kid. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but like even one of my nicknames is, okay, so my last name starts with the letter Q. And the letter Q in the English alphabet is the 17th letter. And so there's very little stuff like that, where it's like the number 17 just has like really weird personal significance. So it's kind of just a favorite number, and that's the only reason that it's my second favorite poem.
Okay, so definitely not the same reason for like most people.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's still a nice poem, but I think if it weren't for the number, it would just like, there's like other poems that are also about like red leaves and other things. So.
Okay, great. And I know that you already gave a message, and it was really a fantastic message, but do you have any last message to the audience?
Last message. Thanks for listening and kind of supporting Karuta in whatever ways are possible. Because I think like as Karuta like expands past just the borders of Japan, it's kind of on people like you and Stone-san and Ara and etc. that like organize these different events and the Karuta Brazil has a bunch of videos that they make, like all this like content and like events and tournaments that people do. I think it just makes like the Karuta world more vibrant and more interesting. And so like no one's forcing anyone to do it, but I think it's really great that people are doing that. And so I encourage people to just like, keep putting that effort and then also keep participating in anything that you see and like help out your other, Karuta enthusiasts, if you will. Because we're all kind of in it. We're all kind of like in the same small Karuta world. So I feel like we should try to help each other out.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Masroor, for showing up in here. And see you later, guys, from Karuta Chat. This podcast is available on several platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Okay. See you guys in another episode. And thank you so much again, Masroor.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yay. Okay.